It all starts with a girl finally coming home. The last 3 years have been long and hard, but still, she endured and waited for this moment. Literally everything that was happening in her life was pushing her more and more to wonder if this was what her dream life looked like, or if something needed to be done about it. She hardly ever felt like the kind of person someone would do anything for. Everything was always on her. She was responsible for everything, and she barely had enough energy for half a day. On top of that, she constantly had to comfort her boyfriend, who had horrible dreams that supposedly prevented death. She constantly saw his terrified eyes and had to soothe him like a small child. And that's not all. His father and brother consider him a disgrace to the family. It's obvious that as soon as his brother sits on the throne, he will immediately order him to get rid of him, and it's inevitable. For some reason, instead of solving it and ensuring his safety, he asks for help not from his friends, but from a girl who already has her own problems, so he is more and more not a real man in her eyes. It turns out that the girl heard that the goddess Neva fulfills the wishes of a holy woman. If he prays to her for 1,000 days, only here is this girl as a holy woman who can help him. I can see why he's asking her to help him. It's the first thing he thinks of. He knows it's not going to be easy, but he's asking her to do it for him. It turns out that his wife, Olga, is the only one who can save his life. At least try, and if she refuses, the consequences could be very serious and not very pleasant. Meanwhile, at what point, a wheel cracked in the carriage. The driver offered to go to a workshop and have it repaired before continuing on his way. He doesn't want to take on such a responsibility and drive the lady away without doing anything or even trying. The girl asked if there was any place around here where it could be done. The assistant replied that he knew of one place where they would most likely be able to get help. It was nearby, and it was Duke Richard's castle. He is sure that they will get help here, because he has driven by and seen the same situation with other people. The girl stands by the carriage and thinks, really? There wasn't any other place around to throw this help. This castle doesn't look much like a workshop where they fix wheels. Here is a very unusual atmosphere, which literally from the first seconds is to feel who lives here. That's exactly what makes it alarming. If it were just an ordinary castle, no complaints would not even be there. Duke Richard is a very famous person. He is called the monster of the castle. Rumor has it that he has the appearance of a ferocious beast and a cruel temper. And if that's not enough, it is said that if you enter this castle, you can't get out again. Olga thought that it would be wrong to judge a man based on rumors, especially if she had never seen him in person, but she was not comfortable staying here, near the castle of a man her husband hated. She wants to get out of here as soon as possible and not be seen, because if her husband finds out she's staying here, he'll have a lot of questions. Olga constantly looks out of the windows and is afraid to see the Duke there. There is a legend that as soon as he notices someone on the territory of his castle, or even in the distance, he immediately invites them to visit and then does not let them go. The girl does not understand how one can agree to such a proposal at all. She thinks that if such a situation happened to her, she would definitely think of something and would be able to politely refuse it. Evening has come. The carriage is still standing in the same place. The wheel has not been repaired, and on the whole the situation is very ambiguous, as one has to think where to spend the night. There are no hotels or acquaintances. They are standing near the castle, which is even scary to approach and even look in that direction. The evening darkness only aggravates the situation and makes them more and more nervous, because as you know, it is at this time the Duke goes out for a walk, and they can meet him at any moment. As soon as the moon appeared, there was this atmosphere that was very different from what it was during the day. It was as if they weren't alone here anymore, and something was about to happen. Just a few minutes later, a miracle happened. They got the tire fixed. It was very unexpected, and since there was still time, they tried to get somewhere as fast as possible. In the meantime, they were met by the assistants and told that they didn't expect them to arrive so late and unannounced. No one was prepared for this, and the reactions were a bit excited. Everyone is very curious about what happened and how it could happen that no one warned anyone about anything. The girl apologized and said she didn't know she had to send a letter about the visit in advance. She promised that it won't happen again. Then she asked where His Highness was, and did so as if she had absolutely no interest in whether he was glad to see her or not, or whether he wanted to talk to anyone at this late hour. At first, the assistants didn't know how to react to this and how to make sure they didn't piss anyone off. They paused for a while, and still they came up with a response. They chose their master in this situation and worried about his peace of mind. So they said they weren't sure it was the right time to talk about anything important and distract him from his resting place. At first, the girl was a little upset, and then tried to hint that this was a very important conversation that couldn't be postponed to another day. If she didn't do it now, she'd be in trouble. After the aides again ignored her request and pretended they could do nothing about it, she looked to the side and saw the tower that most likely held the man she needed and came here for. She said that she didn't need any help and asked everyone to stay where they were, as she didn't want the gentleman to know about her visit before she knocked on his door. Of course they tried to stop her, but it didn't work. She was so confident that she didn't even turn around and didn't notice it. The staff tried to imagine but never understood what could have happened to make her so insistent despite the time she wanted to talk to His Majesty. They were left to watch her and guess what would happen next. The most important thing was just so long as the Lord didn't make it their fault. Otherwise, they would regret very much for letting her go and not creating any barriers. The maids began to consult among themselves what they would do if they found themselves guilty. So far, no ideas, but it seems that tomorrow will not be an easy day. The girl in a few minutes was able to spoil the mood and make everyone afraid of tomorrow. This had never happened here before. Everyone realized that there was no way to stop her and immediately wanted to eavesdrop on the whole conversation, if possible, of course. At some point, one of them remembered that if a girl went into his room or office, she might see him with one other person, and she would dislike it very much. Basically, anything could happen. Everything possible and impossible. Meanwhile, there are only seconds left until the girl goes into the room. One of the assistants already knows what might be there and has no idea how Olga will react to it. If she's here on a business matter, she won't be embarrassed. But if he's not alone in that room, she'll be very angry, and in just a few minutes, she'll be gone. The girl opens the door and sees some strange lady with red hair with him. From what's going on here, it's obvious they have some kind of relationship and she came at a very bad time. She can't believe that she was purposely kept out of her husband's room because this girl could be with him. It turns out that everyone knew about it and purposely didn't tell her. They were literally hiding the mistress from her. And not so long ago, this man begged her and asked for help. Apparently, he does not have so many problems, and not everything is not as bad as it seems if he is thinking about creating a relationship and having a mistress. Usually the girl lived separately, and when she came to his castle, felt as if she were a guest. But from this moment, everything became clear. She has felt that in this relationship for a long time, something was wrong. The fact was that they were not allowed to meet for 1,000 days. She did not know that he came to her house from time to time to watch the spectacle from afar. The girl did it on purpose at her house to keep him and herself safe. She did everything as it should be done. But then she couldn't even imagine that those rules were made for a reason. He'd specifically named that number to allow enough time to date another girl in secret from her. It turns out that all this time she helped him to survive and did everything she could for him, including spending a lot of time. And he dared to do that to her, and he put the whole staff up to it. She can't believe that such a dear person, whom she loved more than anything in the world and could help in any way she could, and seems even worse than a stranger. She doesn't even pay attention to this strange girl. She has no claims to her. If her husband was faithful, no matter who approaches him or what he offers, he would never agree to it. At this point, he tried to make it up to her by going over to her and hugging her a little, but in reality, he would never regain her trust. It was only a matter of time before she filed for divorce and could forget him once and for all. These touches felt in a way that words cannot describe. It was so disgusting that I wanted to literally disappear into thin air or turn back time so I wouldn't have to see any of it. She doesn't even know what to do now, because now she is a free person. Can't just leave and start her life from scratch, as it is usually done in such situations. But for now, she's very interested in hearing his excuses. Of course, it won't fix anything. She just wants to hear what he thinks about it last and how he can explain it. It is impossible to convey in words how unpleasant it is for a strange girl to look at these things in the room of her husband, who just recently could have died and was lying there crying, hoping that she would agree to help him. She told him only one last thing, and that was that a traitor like him didn't deserve to be king and would never be, no matter how hard he tried. After these words, he asked her to watch her words. The girl replied that now he did not seem to be a victim as he pretended to be before, but she hinted that she would do her best to make sure that he never became a king. and in just a few seconds, he started to hate her. Because he realizes that she could very well do this, and he's not kidding now. He grabbed her and told her that she wouldn't dare do that to him, as if he forgot what the situation was now and what he had done, which was 100 times worse than what he had started to fear. He does not notice her tears, does not understand her emotions, and in general, does not realize the scale of the situation. He acted as a real traitor and deserves the most severe punishment. Olga began to say everything she thinks and made it clear that now he is an enemy for her, who will no longer be able to live in peace in this world. She intends to ruin his life, just like he has been doing all this time. Either way, it will be fair, even though he realizes it himself. He got really scared. The guy didn't think this moment would ever come, and didn't realize his act would cause so many problems. Out of desperation, the guy made it so she couldn't resist anymore, walked with her to the edge of the balcony and warned her that if she didn't take it back and change her mind, he'd be forced to get rid of her right now. It's impossible to believe that he's only a cruel person, that even in a situation where he really did something just disgusting, he's able to take it even further. In the end, he didn't change his mind, knocked her over and said the last word with a smile. Supposedly, he didn't need her now. It was the most horrible thing Olga had heard in her life. If she had known this man better, she would never have lived with him in the same city, let alone married this monster. In these last seconds of her life, the girl began to be angry, not even at him, but at herself. She does not understand how it was possible not to see elementary things and be so naive to trust this monster. The worst of it was that even now he looked at her as if he were a winner and had wanted to do it for a long time, and she was just something to be used and thrown away so easily without a second thought or regret. The last thing Olga felt at that moment was a sense of injustice and hatred for the whole world that had given her such a terrible surprise. She was so unwilling to die in such terrible conditions that the girl literally prayed to return to the past or get a new life, which would be much better than the previous one, without traitors and difficulties. When suddenly she opens her eyes and realizes that something is happening, she just died, and just a moment later she sees that girl with the red hair and some other people again. She doesn't understand anything, and is even afraid to ask something. Everyone around her looks at her with frightened eyes, as if something terrible has happened. Very interesting what happened, because at the very least her hair is no longer blonde, but dark, and she looks nothing like she used to. It's very much like she's become some kind of assistant. Her new life is very different from what it used to be. She dislikes very much. The man who in a past life was her husband's mistress looks down on her as if a mistress or superior. Just a moment later, she heard the terrible words and became convinced that she had become a servant girl. I can't believe it. Is life so unfair that after all she's been through, it's only gotten worse? After that, they took her to some room and pretended to take care of her, when in fact, nobody cared at all, especially Mrs. She has other more interesting and important things to do than to take care of one of her subordinates. Besides, she likes Olga much less than the others. So she left right away and pretended like she was really busy, even though she probably wanted to go to the store or sleep as usual. Colleagues did the same, but it's even better. The girl has time to think about everything, realize and understand what to do next. The hardest thing will be to come to terms with this injustice. She couldn't think that after all that had happened, she would be subordinate to her ex-husband's mistress. It was disgusting to even think about it. The first thing the girl decided to do was to look in the mirror to get used to her new appearance and move around a bit. She needed to get used to the surroundings and come to her senses. She has so many questions, and it's obvious that it's not a good idea to ask anyone because it's only going to make things worse. And since she's already not treated very well, it's best to forget about it altogether. Olga wants to believe that this is just a horrible dream that will soon pass, and she will never feel these emotions again. But so far, everything is too realistic, and it makes her very upset. When she made her last wish, the girl didn't think it would turn out this way. If she had known, she would have been better off just keeping quiet and not thinking about anything. It turns out that since she had fulfilled 1,000 days of prayer, some divine creature had mercy on her and was ready to grant her one wish. Olga wished to be brought back to life, for she needed nothing else. She wants revenge on her ex-husband Sergei, who ruined her life and cheated on her for years. The creature replied that unfortunately, he could not help those who wanted to take revenge on someone, because he was a divine creature. It was not their custom. Only if the prophecy of the stars was true, the person she would take revenge on would be severely punished and her wish would be fulfilled by itself. As soon as the girl begins to remember his face, she wants to gain incredible power and make him very much regret what he did just now. It would be much better if she could do it in person, but in general, this option is also fine with her. The main thing is that the guy got what he deserved and at least a little bit felt all that she was feeling. This conversation was as if in a fog. At first she didn't understand anything, but in the end, he managed to convey the essence. But that's not the main thing. It turns out that if the body and soul, which were once together, can't reunite after they were torn away from each other, you need to return to the world of the living and enter the body of another dead person. It should be someone from the relatives, or at least a person she knew. She needed to remember the one who died when she was still alive. Of course, the girl immediately remembered one person who fit this description perfectly. Her name was also Olga. She was a half-sister, and they saw each other literally a few times. It turns out that the girl knew in advance in whose body she could end up, but after she got into the new world, she forgot about everything, and it was not an accident. It was necessary. She had been warned that by the time she opened her eyes again and woke up in a room, she would be a completely different person, with a different destiny and role, and she would have to be prepared for that. Meanwhile, the girl stands in the middle of the room and can't believe that now she has to live in this body and actually be one of the girl's maids, whom she hates more than anyone else in this world, except her big husband, who was and will remain to her forever a monster whom she can never forgive. She closed her eyes and tried to accept it, because there was nothing she could do about it, and she would have to accept life as it was. It wasn't going to get any better. The only thing she could remember after that conversation with the divine being was that everything else, or rather, the most important thing, she would learn about after a while. At some point, the girl felt herself beginning to fill with Olga's memories, a very unusual feeling like taking on a new life. She had to live a hard life as a maid who wasn't even paid attention to. She tried to do her job better than anyone else, but even that didn't help her become one of those who at least was respected and noticed. She could be yelled at for no reason. She worked all day long, and in the end, she was still guilty. It was as if everyone else enjoyed it. When the mistress paid attention only to her shortcomings, everything else seemed better for her, and many people took advantage of it. It is impossible to imagine how the girl could tolerate it and how she had any desire to work in such an environment. In fact, she always listened to everyone else and tried to learn from her mistakes, which in most cases weren't even there. She always agreed with everyone else and didn't see the situation from the side. And now this life has to be lived by another person who loves justice and never ignores such situations. Very interesting how she will work out and what will change after this rebirth. As usual, the mistress came to her and asked why she was not busy with any work. The assistant replied that she had time for everything, and now it was important for her to have at least breakfast to have strength for the whole working day. Besides, that's what the others did as well. Mrs. had never seen the whole staff quietly eating breakfast, and Olga was all in work. So when she saw her idol, she began to resent her, which was very unfair, for all the others at that moment were resting and also doing nothing. At first, the girl didn't understand what was going on. She wasn't used to being in this man's body. At first, she wanted to respond in kind, but she calmed down in time and managed to restrain herself. It was so painful that it seemed as if the mistress had struck her not for nothing, but for something terrible, comparable to betrayal. For she had never struck her ex-husband so severely, though he deserved it much more than she did at present. It turns out that the problem is not only that the girl does nothing. The mistress did not like the fact that the assistant allowed herself to go outside the mansion without her permission. And as everyone knows, there are really such rules here. This situation was noticed by one of the maids, and surprisingly, she came up and asked the lady not to get angry. It was strange that she suddenly defended her colleague, because it had never happened before. Olga did not even count on anyone's help. It would be more usual to see a smile and hear laughter behind her back than such a deed. And surprisingly, it worked. The mistress sent that girl to do some task, and she came even closer to Olga and said that she was very lucky because she was in a good mood today, and so she was going to start this situation and would not punish her. It's very strange because, in fact, Olga didn't do anything wrong from the beginning. Even if she didn't do anything all day, she had the right to do it because she usually did not only her work very quickly, but also helped others if someone needed to go home. In any case, she has nothing to do but apologize and promise that it won't happen again. She pretended to be very ashamed and scared, though in fact she has great indignation and hatred for this man. She was ready to hit her and take revenge for what she did to her in her past life, but for now, she's trying to keep a low profile and hiding in her relative's body. Very interesting what she'll do next, because so far, she's getting more and more eager to get revenge on this man, not to mention what will and what she might do if she sees her ex-husband. Meanwhile, the mistress had gone about her business and left her alone, and also asked her to think over her behavior, something very strange to hear on her part. After that, which is very surprising, the girl who just helped her as if changed her mind and started spreading rumors about the situation, as if it wasn't for her, Olga could have been very badly hurt. Accordingly, now she should thank her. Now it's clear why she did it, and it's obvious that it happens here often. Perhaps this is what the former Olga experienced as well. After staying here for less than a day, the girl never ceases to be amazed at how evil and cruel people are. Before, when she didn't have to work, Olga would even think that there could be such situations and attitudes among the staff. She immediately began to dream of returning to her former life, where no one could or had the right to order her to do anything. Usually it was she who did it. Accordingly, it was even more unusual to feel herself in this body now. But this is not the most interesting thing that awaited her this afternoon. On the way to the mansion, girl accidentally noticed a very familiar man. Looking closely, she saw herself as she was in a previous life, with blonde hair, happy and beautiful girl. And for some reason, the mistress is very happy to see her. She smiles at her and pretends that she has been waiting for this meeting for a long time, while she has been seeing her husband for a long time and hiding it. They begin to communicate as if they were friends who were looking forward to this day. At the same time, Olga just cannot believe her eyes. She wants to run up and tell the whole truth. But so far, she doesn't have any proof, which means she has to be patient for a while, and there's time to think of something more interesting than just telling the truth. You can make a whole show to make everything beautiful and unexpected for every traitor. Anyway, it's all very complicated. She feels like she's in a cage and can't do anything. And even if she wanted to say something, no one would listen to her or prevent her from doing so. At some point, she's suddenly called by her colleagues. They are indignant that the girl does nothing, although they have a lot of work and no one has time for anything. They need her help. Although it's not even surprising, they could never manage without her. Of course, she replied that she would be there soon and did not stay too long, for nothing would change. And now it was better to get to work, lest her mistress should shout at her again. There's so much stuff piling up at her workplace that it's going to take at least an evening, maybe more, to get through it. When she started, she really wanted to know the meaning of everything that had happened, to think it over and decide what she would do next, what her mission and role in this life was. Because at least she was not going to stay a maid, the girl just used this time in her favor, and then it would only get more interesting. Anyway, the way it works out is that as soon as she asked for a second chance so she could let go of her husband and his mistress, she was immediately moved into her half-sister's body. So you can match the events to how she remembers her sister. Olga died from constant stress and mistreatment of her, around the time she visited her husband's mansion in a past life, which means she was sent back in time to a time long before she was killed. And that's something we can do something about. At some point, she had a brilliant idea, so now that she knows who is who and who will give who away, she has a chance to save Olga and prevent a wedding that will ruin her life. Except that one idea is not enough. You need to make a detailed and clear plan, so that if something goes wrong, there are always ideas and other options available to you. The situation is not easy, but since the girl still remembers her feelings when he looked at her with a smile and said goodbye, she has no reason to refuse this opportunity, because now she has learned her purpose in this world. Now nothing prevents her from resuming the justice she never waited for, and it turns out that now she can create it on her own. The main thing is to approach this case very responsibly, and not to forget what she is doing it for. Olga has inherited a gold ring from her mother. If she takes the ring to the Marquis, he will surely accept her as his daughter. He does not deny her connection with him because the ring is engraved with his name and his surname. He is a very honest man and should not suspect anything, but what she needs it for is still unclear. In such an environment, it is very difficult to plan something and adequately assess her possibilities. Now she has different options, and some of them are very questionable. At some point, the girl suddenly cried. She has no strength and desire to do something, because in the past and in this world, everything is so unfair that she does not even have a person with whom to share these problems. Meanwhile, the same Olga is passing by. The girl didn't notice her at first, but as soon as they bumped into each other a bit, she opened her eyes and realized that everything was very bad timing. Of course, she immediately apologized and said that she hadn't noticed at all. She was sure that there would be a lot of shouting and another conflict now. But Olga reacted quite calmly, which is even more surprising. She smiled and said that they looked something like her, except that she doesn't know why she thought that. The girl came closer to her and began to scrutinize her face, as if she suspected something. Olga was very scared, although she tried to pretend that everything was fine, and she did not understand what was going on. After that, she started complimenting me, and even apologized for not noticing her and accidentally pushing her as well. Then, they started talking sweetly, as if the girl didn't pay any attention at all to the fact that she was talking to the maid. That's the difference between her and that villain mistress. Olga can't believe her eyes. She is so used to being treated badly by everyone that now she just can't accept calm communication. It seems to her that this is something amazing that she doesn't deserve. What she was most afraid of was that Mistress would see it and think that Olga was at fault again and was distracting her guest. The girl kept looking around to make sure that the villain wasn't around. She barely had time to answer Olga's questions and keep calm. It was much harder than she thought. She had such a hard look in her eyes that just can't be put into words. It was as if she was looking at herself and couldn't realize that such a thing was possible. Finally, the girl said goodbye to her and wished her a good day, which was also very unusual and, of course, incredibly pleasant. Olga reciprocated and was finally able to relax. She immediately wanted to go somewhere far away so that I might meet another guest who wanted to talk to her. Just a second later, she happened to see Olga walk up to her husband. Without realizing it, she hugged him and started smiling at him. At this point, the girl could barely contain her emotions and tried her best not to look in their direction because it was simply unbearable. She sees herself in the past, a happy girl who naively trusts this man and believes that he will be with her for the rest of her life, that he has no one who can be better than her. It is unbearable to hear these terrible compliments from his side. He embraces Olga and promises all the best. And what is the worst, the girl does not doubt a single word. If she didn't know the situation, she would have believed him just as much as his wife. But now, things are a little different. She has to figure something out and make sure everyone who deserves it is held accountable for every single thing he's done. After that, she had nothing else to do. Could go back to her room and think quietly about everything that had happened during the day. It had been very eventful and very unpleasant from start to finish. Olga rests in her bed and realizes that she will not even be able to sleep. She resents everything from the beginning: betrayal of her husband, mistress, death because of him, rebirth into a new life, which is even worse than the previous one. And now she sees herself in the past and realizes that she has a huge and very important mission. The thing is that now is the moment when any day can be the wedding of these two people. The girl remembers you in the past. It was her dream. So Olga is excited before the wedding and cannot wait for this moment in any way. She looks at her fiancé and realizes that he is the best and most trustworthy man in the whole world. But she is wrong. It is nothing more than a marriage of convenience, but only one of them knows it. It is simply impossible to believe, even in fantasy movies, she does not know situations that would be even a little bit like this. The girl was left all alone, in a difficult situation, without understanding how to realize all this, all that she had in mind. She really wants to believe that everything will work out. She really wants to make sure that this wedding will not take place. I hope that it is still possible to save Olga. She's a very good person and does not deserve everything that this villain wants to do to her. Since she still couldn't sleep, she had to think of something. The girl decided to leave the room and take a little walk in the fresh air. She tried to get out of the mansion as quietly as possible so that no one would notice, because it remained to be seen if there was or was some other rule she didn't know about. Olga found some cozy place. It's very beautiful and unusual here. The area looks very different at night, and for sure. This was not the last time she comes here at night. First, she began to look around, enjoying the calm. And then she thought about what to do tomorrow, because there was very little time left, and she still had no plan for it. She hopes that the night air may calm her down, though it is very unlikely, for it is unbearable to be in her place now. She lives in her mistress's house, where Olga and her fiancé are staying tonight. At some point, she heard a strange noise and decided to check who was hiding behind the bushes. It was very scary, but still, she really wanted to find out. Her first thought was that maybe some wild animal had gotten into the mansion and now she would have to either run back very quickly or she was just imagining things and there was nothing scary there. The girl tried to go as quietly as possible to that bush and check what was going on there, because the sounds didn't disappear at all. There was definitely someone or something there. At first she looked out a little and saw that everything was happening near the gazebo, but so far nothing could be seen. After that, she clearly heard human voices and was even more eager to see who was there, even at such a late hour. At first, that voice seemed very familiar, but the lady paid no attention to it, all for fear that something scary would be there to attack her. She is only seconds away from seeing everything. The girl is very close. All she has to do is pull back the leaves and you'll see everything. But right now, she has no idea who's really there. When suddenly, she sees the same mistress and fiancé of Olga. This is the second time she catches them in the most awkward moment. They thought that no one would see it, but now they have been declassified again. On the one hand, this is another proof that they still need to take revenge. But on the other hand, Olga saw it with her own eyes. Now she is doubly offended to see happy lovers, who think that no one will ever know anything. I wonder very much what the girl will do next, because at the very least, she can offer Olga to watch them tomorrow night, so that she can see everything for herself. Or maybe she had thought of something else more interesting. Either way, she didn't care right now. She was barely holding back her tears and trying not to make any noise. If the mistress noticed her now, there would be a lot of problems. Sitting on the floor, wanting to be transported back to some other reality where she would never see these people again. It felt like this was just another trial, and the previous problems weren't enough for her. Eventually, she managed to overhear their conversation and find out what they could talk about at such times. Like now, the mistress is wondering if it's safe to leave his future wife here overnight, but the guy doesn't seem interested in that. He replied that there was no problem. Besides, she had been asleep for a long time and they had nothing to worry about. He said it with such a smile, as if even if his wife found out, he wouldn't be upset much. He told her that he had specially chosen such a room for her, so that from the windows there was no view of this gazebo, so they were supposedly safe and could fear nothing. The mistress said he was very clever about this. In fact, it is very strange that they chose such a not the most secret place, because if suddenly anyone looks at the street from the window, everything is very well visible. This gazebo in the center of the yard, respectively, attracts a lot of attention. It is very difficult not to notice. Are they not even trying to hide and deliberately made so that they soon declassified? Meanwhile, Olga is still sitting behind the bushes, listening, feeling as if she is still his fiancée, not his assistant, who no longer has anything to do with him. She was sick of his voice and his relative presence. The only thing she wanted to do now was to go up to him and hit him really hard, and also to call the other Olga and do it with her. She just couldn't stop crying. She could barely contain herself, because now she couldn't even go back to her room. She had to wait for them to leave, and then she could go in peace. She's never faced such betrayal before, and she really wants, at least in this world, now that she's been given the chance, to do justice. In the meantime, the next day came. Olga woke up and thought that now everything was clear to her. She had no doubts about anything and wanted to deal with it as soon as possible. Her mind was constantly filled with the idea of revenge against her ex-husband. She no longer had doubts and no desire to forgive. The fact that she was a witness that night gave her all the evidence she needed to persuade Olga to call off the marriage. But whether or not she would succeed and whether or not the girl would listen to her at all was a big question. Anyway, the lady wasn't afraid. She packed up and went to her place early in the morning, hoping that everything would go according to plan and no one would stop her. At one point, she is stopped by the butler and asked if she really came here on an errand. The girl replies that she did. She said she was ordered to meet Lady Olga in person and give her this letter. At first, the man wondered, for no one had warned him about it. It was very strange to him that the girl had come so early, as if indeed there was something very important and urgent in the letter that could not be put off for later. Eventually, he believed and asked to follow him. As it turned out, it was much easier than she thought. Or maybe she was just lucky and the man was in a good mood today. He said that Lady Olga was outside and they would try to find her together, unless, of course, she was busy and wanted to talk. As soon as they found her, The assistant came closer and said that one of the maids had come to give her some letter. At first, the girl was very surprised and wondered who could have sent her a letter at all, because she had seen her acquaintances just a couple of days ago, and there was no one who could have needed to be told something so urgently. And yet, she didn't resist, agreed to accept the letter and thanked me for delivering it so quickly. Also, she was very glad to see the assistant whom she had met yesterday afternoon. The lady asked how she was doing, and then wished her a good day and good spirits. Before leaving, the assistant asked that, if it were possible, the lady should read the letter as soon as possible. And then, deciding what she wished to do after reading it, the girl intrigued her, and indeed, Olga at once wanted to read the whole thing. She was so interested that the lady decided to do it right now, and it was probably for the best. Olga read everything and without further ado, offered her assistant to stay and go to tea with her. Apparently, they had something to talk about. She tried not to react to it in any way so that no one understood anything. The lady is confused and wants to know everything in detail as soon as possible. Really, Olga did not keep the intrigue and wrote about everything as it is. If she was able to do it, it's a very brave thing to do, and it's a very quick way of accomplishing your mission. Perhaps it is very right, for in this way the mistress will not waste her time on a man who dares to deceive her. I wonder very much what they will talk about and what will come of it. At some point, since there was nothing to hide, the girl hinted that this letter was written by her personally, so if the lady was interested, she could tell everything in detail, at any time convenient for her. Everyone around them stands around and doesn't understand what it's about. Some guess that there's some mystery, and in fact, the girl didn't come at all to just hand over the letter and leave. She needs more than that. Eventually, the mistress invited the girl into the living room and said that no one would hear them here. They could talk quietly and not worry about anything, so it was a good time to talk about it. As thanks for the fact that the girl did not keep silent and went to tell her everything at once, the mistress prepared the best sweets and promised that as soon as she knew everything, she would not tell anyone that she had learned it from her. Everything would remain secret. In order for this conversation to start properly, Olga started from the beginning. She warned that there would be many questions, and the first one was whether this letter was really written by her. The girl answered that it was all right. She just didn't want everyone to know about it at once. She thought it would be better to talk to her calmly about it and not do rash things on her own, because at the very least, it was none of her business. The woman said that it was a very good act, and in fact, she doesn't even know how to react to it. After that, the girl said that she saw her fiancé with her lover just last night. She saw them by chance and couldn't afford to keep silent. It's surprising that so far, the lady doesn't react in any way. It seems as if she was prepared for this information, and it's nothing surprising to her, but in fact it's not. She's just used to hiding her emotions well and not showing them for the first second like other people usually do. Sometimes it helps her a lot. And yet, the more the girl told her about everything she had heard last night, it became harder and harder for Olga to hold back her emotions. She couldn't believe it was true. And of course, before thinking anything, she wanted to be sure and see everything in person. She asked if there were any ideas, and of course, the assistant would be happy to help her in this endeavor since they now had something in common. Very interesting what they can come up with, although most likely they will be satisfied with any option. It is obvious that the wedding will not be, and at any moment, the lovers will regret very much about how they dared to do to her. After the mistress had already found out about everything, she suddenly stopped talking and started thinking about something. The assistant even tensed up a little. She even had an option that maybe the mistress would suggest to become allies, because it would be very difficult to think of something alone. Suddenly, Olga said that until she saw everything with her own eyes, she would not believe a single word. And probably it was right, because it would be strange from her side to believe a girl whom she had seen only a couple of times and knew nothing about her. The girl replied that she understood everything, and of course she agreed to any checks. She said that she sincerely wished that Olga did not waste her time on a man who only used her and did not do anything good for her. In fact, Mistress really wants to believe her, but at the same time, she will be sure to the last that it is simply impossible. She reacts to this situation the same way as the girl in her past life did. After that, they began to discuss where and what time they should meet, so that everything finally fell into place, and Olga had no more doubts that the girl was telling the truth, and there was no point in deceiving her. At some point, the assistant couldn't help herself and told her a very long story about how things really are. The girl realizes that it will sound like some kind of fantasy or something unreal, but nevertheless, she had hoped that Olga would believe her at least a little, but still believe her. She said that in her previous life, she was her and got into the same situation, but then she had no one who could warn her and tell her everything. On the contrary, everyone hid from her and helped her lovers. The girl looks at her with reproachful eyes and tries hard to imagine that this isn't some made-up story. Besides, she doesn't understand what the point was of making this up. Eventually, she did listen to her to the end, got the whole story, and admitted that even though it sounded too unrealistic, she had a feeling it was true. And also, to make sure she had no doubts, the girl told me that she knew she had to have a ring with the name of her house on it. Those words literally engraved on the ring. She proved that she really was her in her past life and knows more about her than she might think. As a result, Olga stopped doubting her words and started to trust her. After that, she reminded me of something else that proved she wasn't lying, and it was real. Everything seemed to be fine, and there was nothing to worry about. But at some point, Olga misunderstood her and took it to mean that the assistant might be one of her father's daughters and that they might be sisters. The assistant began to worry very much because everything did not go according to plan. Does Olga now consider her her sister? She explains that only a relative could know about the ring and no one else. Lastly, the lady suggested seeing her as often as possible, as if she had completely forgotten what they had just talked about. The situation had become very confusing. The assistant is very upset. She doesn't know how to explain it properly so that everyone understands each other correctly. She offered to start at the beginning, if the mistress had time, which he hoped she would, for otherwise it would be very bad. Olga replied that she was grateful for the truth, and promised that she would figure something out, and then pass on to talk again in a little while when she was ready for it. The helper is disappointed with the situation and thinks it would have been better to do nothing at all, or just invite her over in the evening to watch something, and she would have seen it for herself. Very interested in what happens next. During the conversation, things are either very good or very bad, so need to think of a new plan, as suddenly, Olga promised that there will be no wedding. She does not know what she will come up with, but she is sure that everyone who betrayed her will regret it very much. They will either apologize for a very long time or will be seriously punished. Now she doesn't even realize the whole situation and doesn't understand how this is possible. She loved this man very much and can't imagine that he would trade her for someone else. When she learned the name of her future husband's mistress, she was even more surprised, because just yesterday they were talking nicely, and she could not even think how many deceivers and traitors are around. At this point, the assistant got very excited because that was exactly what she wanted to hear. After that, she said that there was some plan and she should probably like it for sure. The girl believes that if Olga will be afraid to cancel the engagement and she does not know how to explain it, it is possible to make the prince himself cancel the engagement on his own. He must want to do it and prevent the wedding. Olga asked how she was going to do it because it's just not possible. Most likely, since this marriage for the guy is part of his plan and he plans to capitalize on it, he will definitely never back out of the engagement or call it off. And from this moment begins the most interesting, the girl was waiting for when it can be offered from the beginning. As soon as she got into this body, she offers to follow them, and then, to come and listen to what he has to say about it, it remains only to get the consent of Olga. Mrs. asked if she understood everything correctly, that the assistant is so eager to help that she is ready to participate fully. Of course she is very pleased. The only thing left is to think how good an idea it is and to decide on the timing. The helper smiled and asked to trust her. She said she felt it would be the way it should be. They shouldn't feel sorry for anyone, and everyone should get what they deserve. After that, they held hands and promised that from now on, they would be together. Olga had not yet had time to realize everything that was happening, but she was very happy that she had found a man she could trust. Although earlier, she had considered her future husband to be such a man, and he turned out to be her biggest enemy. In the meantime, the evening has come. The two of them are very worried and anxious, because now is the time when you can get down to business and identify the lovers. The girls waited until everyone went to their rooms, so that there would be no questions about why they are walking so late in the mansion and not resting. For starters, The assistant went out alone to make sure they had another date tonight. She hid behind the corner of a building and tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. Now she has no margin for error. She has to do everything very carefully and be careful. Of course, they were surprised that at this very time the lovers were near that very gazebo. As usual, apparently they come out here very often and it happens at the same time. They're smiling again because they're happy to see each other after a day of hiding it. Even though she is now helping Mistress, it is very hard for her to see them together. She still thinks of him as her husband and can't get used to the fact that it is a different world and a different life. They started kissing, hugging, and enjoying this moment as usual, as if they hadn't seen each other for weeks, maybe even more. Do they really have such a strong love that every time they see each other in the evening, it feels like they've seen each other for really more than a month, not just one day? In fact, she herself wants to go to them and sort everything out. Everything should be done strictly according to the plan, nothing better to invent, especially she is no longer the same Olga that she was in her previous life. In fact, she can be very easily understood. The girl is looking at her ex-husband and is in a situation where she has no right to anything. She is very lucky that the mistress believed her and didn't see it as an invasion of her privacy. She was afraid now, for at any moment she might be seen by one of them, and if she was, the plan would be a complete failure. They would ask a lot of questions. And before Olga arrived, she had no right to say anything. She would have to make up some legend or other to justify her being here at this late hour. But so far, everything is quite calm. They are talking about their personal plans and do not notice anyone. It seems that even if she was standing a few meters away from them and not hiding, they would not notice her anyway. For now, she has to wait for the mistress. She promised to arrive at this time in a carriage, which is very strange as it might attract extra attention, and they don't want that. Meanwhile, she has already arrived at her destination and is looking forward to seeing these lovers. She has had time to come to terms with it and really isn't afraid to see it. At least she thought so. The girl came up to her and said that she was very worried. She was afraid that there might be some trouble because of her. To which the lady replied that the only person who might have trouble was her ex-fiancé, whom she loved and trusted even more than herself. She said it was nobody's fault but his, and really nothing to worry about, it just needs to be finished once and for all and done as soon as possible. It turns out she only came in a carriage to go home after the meeting, as there's nothing to keep her here now. Every minute the assistant notices that she is getting nervous, and this is normal. The main thing is that she should not change her mind and bring the matter to an end. The girl starts to ask if everything is in order, because it is very important for her, more important than for you, because her mission in this world is to take revenge on that man, and only Olga can help her with that. At some point, they noticed that the lovers had returned to the mansion. The girl had a rough idea of where they might be going and offered to go straight after them so as not to lose track of them. Of course, Olga trusts her and agreed to go anywhere as long as she could go home. Now she just wants to say goodbye and wish them well. Or rather the opposite. Since this is the corridor to get to the bedroom unnoticed, the assistant chose this way. She realizes that in any case, if she's going to enter the room, it should be Olga, and she's not going to be there. And if something goes wrong, she should try to hide the fact that she told her anything at all. On the way, Olga has already thought of different options, what she can see in that room. She does not want her suspicions to come true, because the feelings for this man is no longer and never will be. Even if he miraculously tries to think of something and deceive her, she will still go home. At one point, the girl slowed down and asked her new friend and assistant to walk not so fast. She needed to get ready for this moment, as that very room was already too near. At this point, they decided that Olga would go on alone. It would be safer for each of them. Now the assistant could either hide or go to her room, so that no one would know anything about it. It'll keep her reputation and this case clean, and Olga will pretend she accidentally walked into the wrong room. The girl remembered the situation when she was in her place. It was just awful. Only then she did not know what awaited her. But Olga already understands everything, and it is much easier. She has had time to come to terms with it, and it will not be an unpleasant surprise for her, as it was in her case. It was a horror. The emotions she experienced in her past life are incomparable. Finally, she wished her peace of mind, confidence, and reminded her that it was all for the best, because now there was room in her life for someone who deserved to be there for her. She sincerely wishes her not to get upset and to take this meeting as a lesson to be learned for the rest of her life and to trust only those who really deserve it. Olga realizes that these are very good wishes, because she really does not know much about people and can believe anyone. This is her weakness, which she cannot overcome. After that, she thanked the assistant for everything she had done for her, because the fact that the girl did not keep silent like all the others is an indicator that she is a very good and fair person, which in this world, unfortunately, there are very few of them left. They now realize that this is the last time they will ever meet, and perhaps they were meant to meet to help each other. And they did. At one point, looking at the happy Olga, the girl could not believe her eyes. She is very afraid that the same thing that happened to her will not happen to her. After she saw the lovers of her past life, the guy jumped her and did something horrible. So anything can happen after Olga goes to the room. One can only hope that she can react in time and not let him do it, as there's no telling what she can expect from him. She's going to need a lot of luck after all. After that, she went straight outside. For if, in case, they did go out on the balcony, as she had, she might be able to save the girl. She was starting to get really worried, and imagines what it was like for Olga to walk into that room where she could see something horrible and disgusting. After she was in the room, the lights came on immediately, which means that the lovers were frightened and did not expect someone to come into their room at such a late hour. She looks at the balcony and literally prays that the same thing that happened to her will not happen to Olga. It will be very hard to survive after such a thing, because of the height of the second floor. When suddenly she saw her on the balcony, she became even more afraid, because now something very scary might happen. The girl did not know what to do. At first, she wanted to get closer, but then she decided to stay unnoticed and watch it from afar. Unfortunately, it happened exactly the same way. The guy started yelling really hard at his fiancée and making her feel guilty. He also grabbed her arms and went to the edge of the balcony. At that moment, his bride couldn't resist. She was in tears, though just a short time ago she didn't care what she saw. Just a second later, he did the exact same thing to her, and then started smiling as if he got rid of one problem in his life. The girl wanted to turn back time so she wouldn't even look in that direction. She looks at this man and still can't believe that such monsters exist in this world, among ordinary good people. He's been hiding his real face all this time and probably planned to do so anyway. Even if Olga didn't find out, he'd just get what he wanted and get rid of her. The assistant began to blame herself very much, because if it were not for her, Olga could have lived a few more days. She does not even know how to go on living and how to take revenge on this man. So if the fact that his wife found out doesn't bother him at all, now he has to come up with something more serious. A few minutes later, the mistress also came out to the balcony. She didn't expect that the guy was capable of such a thing and even wanted to go somewhere else. She had never witnessed something like this before. The girl began to scream very much, and it is not surprising. It is very interesting whether she will realize that the same thing can happen to her. Because if suddenly it will come to engagement, it is not excluded that he will have some mistress again, and he will not need her, as well as Olga. It's just impossible to watch. It's not clear how to fight him, and what can be done to make him regret a little that he ruined the life of a person who loved and trusted him. Hours had passed and they still couldn't get away from that place. Did he really feel ashamed? Though it was too late now. I wonder how his mistress can trust him after such a thing. She probably doesn't even think about the fact that this man won't change and such a thing can happen to her. She asked what to do now, because at the very least, you'd have to come up with something before morning before anyone saw it. He asked her to be quiet and explained that there was no need for all this yelling and excitement right now, to supposedly focus and figure out what to do. But that's not the most interesting thing. He offered to make it look like she did it, and he was just standing next to her. The girl didn't understand how he could say that, and replied that it was out of the question. She wasn't going to take the blame for it. He did it. He must answer for his deed, and by this she made the villain even more angry, and he again lost control of himself and hinted that if she refused, he would be very sorry. It turns out that another girl didn't know who she started trusting. This person doesn't change and does this to absolutely everyone who starts doing things differently than they are favorable to them. In addition to this, a very strong thunderstorm started, which means that people who are resting and sleeping can wake up and see everything. The guy started to get nervous because he doesn't know how to explain everything and what will happen to him for it. They ended up having a huge fight, and the girl miraculously got away unharmed. At one point, she couldn't help herself and started crying. She was clearly thinking about ending the relationship because after his behavior, It was clear to her that she didn't need a guy like that. She asked her not to catch up and told him that if he wanted, they could talk another day. Right now, she wasn't in the mood or desire to talk to him at all. No wonder he wouldn't even listen to her. He was so scared he thought she was going to tell everyone. So he caught up with her, stopped her, and asked her to stay here. The girl was even more frightened. She realized that he was a real villain, and until this moment, she hadn't seen his real face and couldn't even think who he really was. She started crying again. She felt she was in a hopeless situation. She can't even leave here safely. He just won't let her do it like a real villain. Instead of calmly explaining everything and talking, he starts smiling as if he's up to something again. His look is very alarming and makes me more and more nervous. The mistress regretted getting involved with this man in the first place. She wanted to turn back the clock to no way, not even to talk to him. At one point, he asks why she's so afraid of him, which was such a strange question that she immediately wanted to hit him really hard and make him feel everything she was feeling right now. Meanwhile, the rain begins to intensify. The atmosphere becomes unbearable. She dreams of going back to her room and the next day going somewhere very far away from this man, to forget him and never remember him.